So our first speaker will be Carl Francis. Carl is a highly accomplished mineralogist with interests in crystal morphology, mineral growth features, and pegmatites. Among his many awards, he was awarded the Carnegie Mineralogical Award in 1992. He was the curator of the Harvard Mineralogical Museum until 2011, at which point he retired, but then moved up to the main Mineral and Gem Museum, where he is now the curator there. Today, he will be telling us about Quartz, specifically Dauphiné habits and Dauphiné twins. With that, please join me in welcoming Carl. Be all set. Here's the pointer.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's working. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm a mineral collector, and I suppose most of you are as well. So collecting, as you know, is a process of gathering objects together which are in some way related. But it's also an informal process of self-education. What you know about minerals informs the choices you make when you select a specimen to acquire. I chose to collect minerals in retirement for a couple of reasons. And one was to stay in touch with the many friends I'd made in the mineral community over the years. And the other was to continue to learn about minerals. And the presentation you'll hear in a few moments is the result of what I've learned as a collector. It began with looking at specimens, mostly those in dealers' inventories or at shows and symposia, buying some interesting ones, taking them home, and then examining them over and over again. Reading to try and understand what I was looking at, and then talking with other collectors and mineralogists. So let's get started with. Where do I?
Try the down button. Try this one.
No, nothing's happening.
It is on. Let's try.
I can do it from
Yeah,
the keyboard.
Oh no, now it's working. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Now if you hit the down button, it should advance.
Okay. Dauphiné was a province in the Kingdom of France. It's in the southeastern part of the country. And crystals from hydrothermal veins there, notably the La Gardette gold mine near Grenoble, where this specimen is from, were the subject of some of the very earliest studies of quartz crystals by European mineralogists. The first modern paper on quartz was published in 1814. And both a crystal habit and a twin law are named for the province, the Dauphiné province. And that can be confusing. So we'll take a look at both today. This is an 8-centimeter wide rock crystal cluster from recent mining at the old La Gardette mine. Note the large, steep terminal faces of the Dauphiné habit crystals here and here. Uh-oh. Did I touch something on the side?
No, that happened.
Okay. We're going to go with a conventional way of doing things.
These two.
So this is a good example of a Dauphiné habit specimen. It's European classic. And if there were to be a type locality for quartz, I would nominate the La Gardette mine because of its historic importance and the beauty and abundance of its crystals. So crystal shapes of quartz are actually pretty simple. There are three forms that enclose the quartz, and almost all quartzes have these three forms and none other. However, the relative development of these three forms can be quite variable. So the principal form, M, is the prism, and it can be long or short. And the termination is 6 faces, but it's really 2 sets of 3 faces. They're rhombohedrons. And so one is labeled R and the other is labeled Z. And if you look to the right, this is a more typical example of a crystal where one is larger than the other. And by convention, R is greater than Z. The one on the left does occur, and that's a little bit confusing because then you start thinking this is truly a hexagonal crystal. It's really a trigonal crystal, but these do occur. There's some wonderful little quartz crystals from Germany, from Suttrop in Germany, that look like this. So let's just move on. This is kind of extraordinary. This is what the crystal shape of quartz looks like if you calculate the shape based on the location of the atoms in the unit cell. And so what this doesn't show or doesn't reflect in any way is the influence of the environment in which the crystal formed. So think of this as the ideal quartz shape. And we're going to be talking about quartz crystal habits next that are different. And the difference results from growing in a particular geological environment. So what is a quartz crystal habit? It's a combination of forms that provide a distinctive appearance that you can see over and over again. On the left is what I think of as a normal quartz crystal. It's a prismatic crystal. But if you were a New Mexico collector collecting those Pecos diamonds, or a New York collector collecting Herkimer diamonds, you wouldn't think of this as normal at all. These crystals occur primarily in hydrothermal veins, but an awful lot of the description and the talking about quartz crystals sort of thinks of this as the normal. But I'll try and remember to call it a prismatic habit as opposed to the normal habit. In the middle, you have another crystal about the same size. It's heavily striated, but if you look down on the top, it's definitely trigonal. The prism faces are in 2 sets, one rather narrow and the other kind of wide. And this is called the Muzo habit. And it's named for Muzo, Colombia. These quartz crystals were found in the emerald mines. And they've been around forever, of course, but it was only described in the 1960s, curiously enough, by a Swiss structural geologist, not a mineralogist. And the crystal on the right is a Dauphiné habit crystal with a very large single rhombohedral face forming the termination. The other 5 rhombohedral faces are there, but they form a very narrow girdle around the large face. So now you understand what a crystal habit is, right? It's a distinctive combination of crystal forms that gives you this appearance that's characteristic of perhaps an environment. So here, Chris, this is a really good example of a Dauphiné habit specimen. And I should have said before, let me go back. This was one of my great achievements as a collector. All 3 of these crystals are from the same mine in Arkansas, the Zegras mine at Blue Springs in Arkansas. And I bought them at the same time. I found all 3 at the same time. And this really kind of got me started on the crystal habits of quartz. So there we go. It's a very nice, very limpid example. It's only about 8 centimeters tall. It's about like that. And here is another example. This is from Brazil. It's from Corinto. And let me explain that in Brazil, there's an area that's very much like Arkansas that it's underlain by sandstones. There are quartz veins there. They mine the quartz veins. They've been producing quartz specimens forever. When you see them on the market, they're labeled Minas Gerais. It's frustrating because there's not very much specific locality information. But there's a town called Corinto, and that's a center where miners bring the quartz crystals together to sell them. And if you go to mindata.org and look up Corinto, Rock Courier talks about it and shows pictures of Corinto, and it's a mining center. And so he advocates labeling these things as being from Corinto. That works just fine, even if you don't know the exact town or the exact name of the place, because a lot of these places actually probably don't have names. But I like this one. It's not quite as limpid as the last one, but it comes to a really sharp point, and the face is very large, the dominant face. Here are two more, a contrasting pair of rather large Dauphiné crystals, Dauphiné habit crystals. The quartz on the left is morium. It's so dark black, the Swiss don't call it smoky quartz anymore. It's called morion. And you may have read that in reference to the Scottish smoky quartzes that they use in jewels. So morion is a term used for black quartz, not smoky quartz. It's from Gletschhorn above the Tiefen Glacier in Uri, Switzerland. And it's 17 centimeters tall. So it's a good sized crystal. And it's got a sort of a chisel edge on the back. And on the right is a crystal from Peñas Blancas and emerald mine. It's the most remote of the emerald mines. But when I started collecting in retirement, it was producing wonderful, wonderful quartz rock crystal. And so this is an example from there. And the takeaway from this slide is that when we normally talk about quartz crystal habits, we're talking about the length. Is it a prismatic habit? Is it a Cumberland habit, which is very short or almost no prism faces? Is it a tapering habit? There are two tapering habits. I already mentioned the muso, which is the crystal on the right, is tapering and it's trigonal, but you can have them tapering with six-fold symmetry too, and that's named for the Italian, the Swiss canton, which borders on Italy, and it's Tessin. Those of us who aren't linguists often might call it Tessin. It's Tessin, but it's pronounced Tessin because the Italians would pronounce it Ticino, Ticino, Ticino. So Tessin habit. But look, we have a Dauphiné habit on a prismatic crystal and on a muso habit crystal. The Dauphiné habit only affects the termination. So you can have sort of two habits in one. Here's a typical muso habit from the McEarl mine. And I thought this was very exciting to be able to acquire McEarl mine crystal when I was first starting, because the McEarl mine is famous for having very, very limpid or having great clarity. Most Arkansas quartz crystals, the transparency is constricted to the top third, and then it gets cloudy as you get down below. But the McEarl crystals are really pretty much clear all the way to the bottom. And so I was really excited about getting that. And the fact that it was a Dauphiné crystal or Dauphiné habit didn't really occur to me when I snapped this up. And notice that it has sort of ledges on the side. The horizontal striations that you typically see on the prism faces are little alternations between a prism and the rhombohedron, prism, rhombohedron. The striations are very, very narrow rhombohedral faces. In this crystal on the right-hand side, you can see they're more like steps, not just like striations. It's 13 centimeters tall. Most of the specimens or the slides actually are Jeff Scoville photographs, and should acknowledge Jeff because he's been very, very generous to me in allowing him to use his pictures. So here we have a quartz crystal group. It's 8 centimeters wide. It's from Mount Ida. in Arkansas, there's this great big lake, and Mount Ida in Montgomery County is on the west end of the lake, and Garland County and Blue Springs or Jesseville is on the north end of the, or east end of the lake. But there's a lot of quartz all the way around. And notice that as you go from left to right, there's a pointed crystal, a chisel shape, pointed one, and then a chisel shape. So you can get either. It depends on how that crystal intersects the prism faces. And in the article that's upcoming, there'll be a diagram by Pete Richards, who's my co-author on this material, that explains that slight variation. So we could even say that there's two habit variations within the Dauphiné habit. You could have a pointed one or you could have a chiseled termination. And the next one shows a chiseled termination. This is again from Peñas Blancas in Boyacá, Colombia, 8 centimeters tall. This is another one from there with a chisel termination. It's 6 centimeters tall. I think of this as a thumb. It just reminds me of a thumb. Here's another Collier Creek, Mount Ida, Arkansas quartz crystal group. Mostly I collect single crystals to really focus on the morphology, but I got this group because it just has a sense of directionality to it. And you could imagine that this grew in a vein and the solutions flowed through, and as a result, you got, it growing this way. But you'd be wrong. The up direction is down here. It's well established that these things grow in veins that are basically vertical. And as the crystals start to grow, there's an effect that pinches out crystals that are not sort of normal to the vein walls. So the vein, think of the vein as being vertical with the crystals coming in and perpendicular to it. And the large faces face down, that they grow facing down. Here's just a pretty one. It's from something called the Monte Cristo mines. A lot of mines in Arkansas, and a lot of people don't pay attention to the differences, if there are differences. When I started on this, I went to the Smithsonian. All of the Smithsonian's Arkansas quartzes are labeled Hot Springs, Arkansas. They're not even the town where the mines are, and there are no individual mines. It was just a policy. They're all Hot Springs, Arkansas. So this is Monte Cristo mines, and it might be hard to find because it probably haven't been operated recently. So most of my specimens of Dauphiné habit quartz are from Arkansas because it's a prolific source of them, but they occur around the world. And this is an example from Brumado. The sort of rusty looking material in the lower right is magnesite, the magnesium carbonate that's so important at that mine. And the specimen is interesting because the crystal faces aren't planar. They've got little overgrowths that I don't really understand, but I bought it to have more geographic representation in my collection in the article. And here's another one that's a real favorite. It's from Panasquera, and it has tourmaline inclusions, probably schorl, but the surfaces are slightly etched. And so I look at that and I think this is a complete whole, and it's sort of like looking at a snow globe. You're looking into a little world like it's a snow globe. Another crystal group, this is from Arkansas, from Brazil, from the town of Thomas Ganza near Corinto, and again, purchased to have more locality diversity. The Alps. The famous central Swiss Alps that have produced wonderful quartz crystals don't produce very much for Dauphiné habit crystals, but they're surrounded by a limestone area called the Prealps, and Dauphiné habit crystals are really quite common from there. This is from the east end near the city of Chur, called Tamminister Calanda. It's a small specimen. And I actually saw a much larger one in Brent Lockhart's collection that Terry and I visited yesterday. So You can get these from the Dauphiné habit from Switzerland, but it's more likely to be from the limestone pre-Alps rather than the Central Alps, because most of those quartz crystals are formed in cavities in granite. Isn't that dramatic? This is from an area called La Beleza in Santander, Colombia. It's a David Ziga specimen. He kind enough to supply this photograph. It's 13 centimeters tall, so it's quite a handsome specimen, but very clearly a Dauphiné habit. Now for the rest of the story. Published this article in Rocks and Minerals magazine, got that off the desk, on to the next thing. And you usually, when you do that, you don't get much feedback. Somebody might see it at a show and say, oh, nice article, but you usually don't get an email or a letter. I got a letter written on yellow lined paper from a collector up in Minnesota that I've been corresponding with. And he said, you should have included the other kind. Now, that's the other kind. And what is it? It's one where instead of having the big R face facing down, when the crystal grew in the cavity, the X face, the small one, was facing down. And what happened? The two adjacent R faces got large. So this is another habit within the Dauphiné habit, and it's the crystal growing upside down. So it has a small central triangular X face and then two large ones. And I'd sort of been aware of it, but it really hadn't sunk in. The Russian mineralogists had been studying this in the 30s, and there's a whole school of mineralogy in Russia that is totally ignored in the United States, Canada, England, and it's about crystal growth and how crystals really, really grow. You can go through a whole PhD program as somebody you did. Crystal growth is never mentioned. That's a science unto itself, synthetic science, and not related to geology in academia in North America. But the Russians have developed it, and a translation of a book, it's called, they call that science ontogeny, the ontogeny of crystals. And there was a book published in 1965 about it. And so I learned about it in there. And I was at Tucson, and I went to that mineral and fossil co-op on Oracle. And one of the Coleman family, Ron Coleman, has a big showroom there. He's had it there forever. And you go in and you see lots of quartz groups like this, and then you see the big ones. And if you get invited into the back, you can see quartz crystal groups the size of this podium. And it's just great because you can walk around and you can see a lot of quartz in a very short time. And I'm looking at these quartz groups, none of which I liked very much because the crystals weren't distinct. They were all kind of intergrown. But I started seeing this. And I kept on, and there's another one, another one. And so my awareness increased, and I finally found this, and then I dashed off something to Marie. So the Dauphiné habit has one rhombohedral face dominating the whole termination. And that's what everybody says, all the textbooks, even the Swiss ones will talk about it that way, and they won't talk about this. But this is the flip side, okay? And remember that you can have, when you have the R face large, you can have it either as a chisel tip or as a point. So that's the Dauphiné habit. Now let's turn to twins. In Frondel's book on the silica minerals, the System of Mineralogy, published in 1962, it's the most scholarly, comprehensive thing available in English. Not the best things for collectors, perhaps, but it's really, really good. There is a book in German called, what is it? It's Reichard is the author, but it's in German. But you can look at the figures and the pictures, and I discovered that Google has a little translate program. And so you type it laboriously into English, and then you put it into that, and you can get a rough translation from the German. So those are two places to get good information about quartz. And Frondel lists more than 15 twin laws for quartz, but only 3 are common. the Brazil twin, the Dauphiné twin, which you're about to learn more about, and the Japan twin, which you're probably very familiar with. Now, quartz has two kinds of twins. The Japan twin, let me show you one, which you're all familiar with, has inclined C-axes. So one crystal has a C-axis like this, the other crystal has a C-axis like that. But there are also crystals with parallel axes. So one is like this and the other is like this, and it's pretty hard to sort those out. And that's what we're doing today. So Brazil twin and the Dauphiné twin are both parallel axis twins. And this is probably a new concept to you. The inclined axis twins is what you take for granted. That's what you know about. Here's another Japan law twin or Japan twin, but it doesn't seem to have arms. They're almost square. So there are habits of twins as well. And I won't say any more about that. This one happens to be from the PC mine in Basin, Montana, which you'll know about. I bet you have them in your own collection. It's 4.5, a couple of inches on an edge. So here's where I need to get some help. And no, we're not going to sexualize this. Ed, please. Ed, Ben. Okay, I want you two guys to stand facing the audience and move forward, Ed, just a little bit. So you're basically on one plane here. Now, the twin law of quartz, and twin laws are always described in terms of usually a mirror plane or a rotation axis. And so it's a geometric relationship between the crystal structures of the two. So the twin law, the Dauphiné twin law, is a 180-degree rotation about the C-axis. So Ed, I'm going to ask you to turn halfway around and look at the blackboard. Okay, now I want you two to move together so that your shoulders are touching. So if we have one quartz crystal here and one quartz crystal there, and one's facing forward and one's facing backwards, and they're touching, you now have a contact twin of the Dauphiné habit. Got that? Okay, move apart and turn around. Ed, turn around. Okay. Now we have two quartz crystals that are in parallel growth. Same orientation. But when he turned around, that's when it became the twinned orientation. And when they touched, that's when it became a contact twin. If they were, Ed, turn around again. Okay, and they're not touching. So they're just two quartz crystals on a matrix, but they're not a twin. Okay, now, Ed, move this way a little bit more. Thank you. Now we have an exercise in your imagination. We're going to build an interpenetrating twin right between the two of them. And we're going to do that by taking pieces of each of them and adding them together, imaginary, and that's going to be our interpenetrating twin of the Dauphiné twin law. Okay, so let's start at the top. We're going to take Ed's head and put it on the top, okay? We're going to take Ben's left arm and bring it over here. And we're not, this is just total imagination now. And we're going to take Ed's torso and right arm and put it over, no, it's your left arm, and put it over there. So we're going to have one left arm, two left arms. Now we're going to take Ben's torso down to his knees and move it over there. And we're going to take Ed's from knees down and feet and move it over there. Okay? And so what you've constructed is it looks like a single crystal of quartz, but it has these chunks that are oriented either forward or backward. That is, they're twinned. And those chunks aren't necessarily connected to one another. Because when you think of twins, they're always connected, right? But this is what makes it hard to think about interpenetrating twins of quartz, because the volumes that are all oriented in the same way, that would be one arm of the Japan law, the Japan twin, or versus the other, they're not connected. They're just volumes all within what looks like one quartz crystal. Thank you, gentlemen. So, Dauphiné twin law is 180-degree rotation. The other twin laws in quartz are mirror plane reflections. Like with the Japan law twin, there's a mirror plane here that reflects this one into that one. Now, we're going to talk about contact twins, and then we're going to talk about interpenetrating twins. So I've discovered by reading Frondel and looking at specimens, 6 different ways of recognizing Dauphiné twinning in quartz. 6 different manifestations. The first case is the contact twins, and here we go. We'll show some pictures. But then there's case 2, 3, 4. All the others are interpenetrating twins. So here's a contact twin. It's a micro. It's 6 centimeters tall. It's from Long Lake in St. Lawrence County, New York. Field collected and photographed by my co-author, Pete Richards. And it should be pretty clear that those two are twinned, right? Here we're looking down on another micro. It's a small crystal from a geode from Nauvoo, Hancock County, Illinois. Again, a Pete Richards piece. And you're looking down on 2 quartz crystals that are contact twins. So they're side by side and touching. The R faces are all opaque white. They've got some sort of little coating on them. But the Z faces, the smaller, usually smaller faces, are translucent, so they look gray. And so you can imagine an axis of rotation right at the center, and it would rotate one of those gray areas all the way around 180 degrees, and it would coincide with the other one. So another example of a contact twin of the Dauphiné law. Here's the first one I found. And the easy way to recognize them is that the little X face here is parallel to the R face here. So 2 crystals grown together, parallel, except this small face parallels the big face. And you can recognize those from across the room. As I did with this example, I went to the New Mexico Symposium, and one of the dealers had several quartz crystals. These are from Diamantina and miniaturized. And they'd all been sawn off on the bottom, so they stood up nicely, and there were about 6 of them. And from across the room, I saw, hey, 2 of them growing side by side. I walked over, and one had the small face on the right and the big face on the left. Aha, Dauphiné twin, my best example. And this one is not so easy, but it's really pretty. It's very, very limpid, and it has some etching on the surface. It's from Corinto. It's 11 centimeters tall. It's a Rock Courier collection specimen. Here's one from Miller Mountain in Blue Springs, Arkansas. It is interesting because this crystal only has R faces. There's no X face right there. Same with this. So this one and this one are in parallel orientation. But look at this one over here. It has a great big R face parallel to what that should be. Or in other words, if this line, this intersection between the 2 R faces would come right down here. So this is a twin, is twinned with respect to that, those 2. And here's another example. This is from Alivard in France. It's on Mindat. And it's here because this crystal forms a right angle with this crystal. This is a Japan twin. But look at that little X face there and the big R face there. So this one and this one are Dauphiné twins, contact twins. Now we're switching to type 2. These are the interpenetrating twins. And if you have a quartz crystal, actually 2 of them intergrown, but they only have one set of rhombohedral faces, we'll call R, three faces on the termination. But the one that's rotated also has those. The smaller one, or the twinned one, will stick out of those larger faces like dormers on a roof. Or if they're equally developed, you look down on the top and they look like a drill bit. And I've never seen one, but Pete had this one from St. Hilaire. It's just the whole field of view here is 7 millimeters, so it's pretty small. But you can see that's the dormer. That's the twin crystal twinned against that one. Kind of subtle, but it's about our only example. Here's another example, not as elegant. It's from the same geodes from Nauvoo, Illinois. And the this guy is a dormer. It's a twin. It should be, this is an R face and this is sticking out. That's the twin crystal sticking out. Not very satisfying for a hand specimen collector, but let's move on to type 3. This is the one that you always see in the textbooks. This is a 6 centimeter smoky quartz from Brazil. And it has an extra face right here and right there. So this is the prism face M. That's the rhombohedral face R. This is called, if it's on this side, it's a left-handed crystal. If it's on the right-handed side, it's the right-handed crystal. But X faces, this is a trigonal mineral now. Every other face, every other prism face should have an X face on it. But here we have 2 X faces or prism faces side by side with it modified by X faces. So that indicates it's a twin. In the most ideal circumstance, you have 6 of these X faces all the way around. That's pretty wonderful. And if you take a picture down the C-axis and you can see those things, they almost don't exist. There's one on Mindat that I've seen that I really envy. Okay, now we're on to the next type. This is type 4. Instead of looking at X faces, which would be here, this is a little diamond-shaped face here or diamond-shaped face there. Instead of modifying the corner, it modifies the corner of all 4 of these faces. And like the X face, S faces should occur, only 3 of them on a crystal. And here we have 2 of them side by side. So just like in the last case, this is a Dauphiné the Dauphiné twin. Ideally, there'd be 6 of them all the way around. I have seen on Mindat one where there's 3 in a row, one after another after another. I've got a couple in my collection, but there are only 2 of them side by side like this. Type 5 is the most common of all. And that's where you're looking at the crystals and they've been slightly etched. And the result is that reflected light is reflected in one way by one twin and in another direction by another twin. So you can see a difference in the reflectivity because of the twinning. And this is another Morion. It's kind of large. It's from not Mount Melosa, the other one, Mount Mulanje in Malawi. And look at this zigzag line, and that's kind of dull and that's kind of bright. That's the contact between one and the other twin. And so if you look at a lot of these things, this is where you're going to recognize Dauphiné twinning most commonly. This is a remarkable specimen. It's a lovely rutilated quartz from Novo Horizonte in Brazil, in Bahia. But look at the prism faces, rough here, smooth there. and vice versa. And that's so rough that you can feel it with your fingertips. You can feel it. So this is a rudolite quartz from Nova Horizonte, but it's also a really nice example of Dauphiné twinning, type 5. Remember the PC Mine twin? This is another Japan twin that happens to be from Washington Camp in Arizona. But what is interesting about this is that if you look at this in reflected light, you can see differential reflection here, and Pete has colored it over here. And so this is Dauphiné twinning that you can see in the individual arms of the Japan twin. And this is really cool. This is from the Manhan mine in East Hampton, Massachusetts. It's an old lead mine. I collected there when I was a kid. It's a Pete Richards specimen, but it was Bill Henderson was a big micromatter from Connecticut. And he found this and took this picture. And so we have iron oxide, hematite, coating the quartz crystal, but it's coating the R faces and it's not coating the Z faces. So you can see here, there's a Z face, but there's a twin within the Z face here. And over here, you can see that's twinning. So the differential absorption of the hematite on the R, but not on the Z, reveals the twinning, analogous to how the etching did. So this is the sixth way, the sixth manifestation of Dauphiné twinning. And this is looking down the Z-axis of a Zegras mine crystal. It's probably this tall, and it has that patchiness, again, due to, which reveals the twinning. It's not due to the twinning, it's the iron oxide revealing the twinning. So here we go. As collectors, this is probably of considerable interest to you. The contact twins, once you know what you're looking for, you can spot them. The dealers and the other people don't, so look carefully. They're out there. I've never seen one of the Dormer or drill bit twins. I've only seen the pictures of Pete's micromounts. The X faces are common, but you just have to start looking. Again, most people don't know about it and don't look. The S faces are less common than the X faces. The etching is very common. You just have to look, and sometimes you'll see it, sometimes you won't. And then the partially coated ones are very rare. So, circling back to crystal habits now. We're still talking about twinning, but we've only talked about twinning in terms of the normal prismatic habit of quartz. Take a look at these. These were very exciting discoveries. Here is a Muso habit, side-by-side Dauphiné twin. You can see the etched face here butts right up against the polished face or the unetched face here. And so this is a twin. And then this is the two-face twin riding piggyback on the one-face Dauphiné habit. These are new to science. I've never seen a photograph, a drawing, or any description of these in the literature. So those were really exciting discoveries. I was at Tucson about 4 years ago, and one of the dealers had a nice lot of Corinto crystals from which this came. And I looked and looked and looked and picked out a few good ones, and I couldn't sleep that night. And I went back the next day and I started with flat 1, and I went through every flat, picking up almost every one of them, examining them closely. About 2 flats from the end, I found this. So hours and hours of looking at quartz crystals were rewarded with something that's never been seen before. The other one, as you know, probably from Tucson, the TGMS show on Friday is when all the kids come in. So it's a real slow day for the mineral dealers and so on. And Terry sent me on an errand up to take some Rocks and Minerals magazines to Mineral City. And so I dropped those off in Building D, and I was walking back to my car, cut through Building B, and there was a door open, and it was the dealer was a friend whom I hadn't seen yet, and it was already we'd been at 10 days at Tucson already, and I hadn't seen him. So I walked in, and right on his shelf, just at this level, right there, was this thing. Didn't have to work for that one very hard at all. But incredible. So collecting is a type of informal learning. And I developed all this understanding about the Dauphiné habit and Dauphiné twins as a collector. I hope your collecting will be as rewarding. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carl. That was super interesting. I learned a lot personally. We have some time for questions. Are there any questions for Carl? We've got one right here.
Thank you. I was just curious, since you showed the rarity of the different twinning types at the end, how rare is that upside down Dauphiné growth habit where you have the two large bases?
Are you asking if
Like
about the twins or just the habit?
just the habit where it's growing
okay.
upside down? Because I've never seen that.
They're theoretically, they should be 50, it should be 50% equal. You know, it should grow this way equally to this way. But because they haven't been published in the literature, and because it's not one big face, it's not quite as distinctive. So I think it's below the radar scope. I'm seeing them more and more frequently, but I don't see a lot of them. Remember the diamantina crystals that I showed you with the sawn bases?
Yeah.
I went to Tucson and I saw from the distance from me to you in a dealer's booth. I said, oh, that's one of the two-face. And then I decided I didn't have to spend that much money for it. And I came back and it was gone. But so I think the answer is that they're just as common as the one face, the well-known Dauphiné habit. But I think that they're just generally unrecognized. So there you go.
Yeah. It's habits of collection. So keep an eye out
You
for.
too?
Yeah.
Two of you in the audience, three of us.
Are there any other questions for Carl? Yes, Caleb, you can yell and I'm going to repeat it just for the recording.
Yeah, project. So, Carl, do you have any theories as to why some of the twin laws are occurring in more of a higher frequency, or do you think it's more of a numbers game? And Quartz is obviously one of the most abundant barrel owners, so eventually you're going to have a number of these pop up. So you think it's a local condition thing or more of a statistics thing?
Is the question about the number of twin laws of Quartz?
No, sorry, it's about the frequency at which you see the twin laws and
Okay.
and what might generate.
Okay. During World War II, quartz was really important for oscillator plates. And so there was a big effort to mine it everywhere, but primarily in Brazil. And so the people who got involved with that knew a lot about twinning in quartz because you didn't want that for your oscillator plates. And so after the war, there was a big symposium and they summarized a lot of their observations and so on. And so quartz is almost always twinned. It's just that we don't, because of this parallel axis business, we don't see it mostly. And that's why I've done what I've done for you today, is to try and explain how you can recognize it. What they were doing, of course, was cutting it, etching it, and looking at it in cross-polarized light so you could see it and you could eliminate, or you could mark out the twins so that they could be cut away so that the oscillator plates could be found. But quartz is almost always twinned, an untwinned one. I mean, we see these things and we don't realize the twinning, but a truly untwinned one is apparently very rare.
And so on one of your last slides, you listed the relative abundance of these different kinds of twins. Do you have any sense of what controls why one is very uncommon versus one very common?
No, those are guesstimates based on my experience and sort of writing that article and dealing with it. So no, they're guesstimates, but I think the sequence is probably right, but the quantitatively it might not be right.
And I just have a follow-up question, since people were looking for untwinned quartz for their oscillators, and you said quartz is overwhelmingly twinned. That must have made it really hard to find.
Well,
quartz
what
for
they did was
oscillators.
they identified the twin portions, and then they cut those away, and then they made the oscillators from the remaining part.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Bruce.
Well, generalize why certain quartz is fine. Because the bases are smaller than the elongate ones. Is it a function of temperature or depth or whatever?
Let me just repeat this so we have it in the recording. Bruce is asking about what controls the squatness or longness of the quartz crystal.
I think temperature is a factor. The Pecos diamonds and the Herkimer diamonds are formed in sedimentary environments, and they are obviously low temperature. The Pecos diamonds aren't in cavities the way the Herkimers are, and so they tend to have more of that pseudocubic habit than Herkimer does. And then the vein quartz is all pretty much prismatic, and sometimes it can be extraordinarily prismatic. Pegmatitic quartz is not that prismatic. If you did a ratio of the width to the length, you'd find that pegmatitic quartz would have a ratio of about 3, and the hydrothermal quartzes would be 5, 6, even up to 10. I mean, you get up to 10, and that's really very, very nice and elongated. Yeah. So I think it's environment, and I don't think anybody's quantified it, but depth, temperature, those factors that we think about regularly can be involved. But I don't think that Herkimer's or the Arkansas quartzes were that deep, so I don't think it's a huge pressure thing. And who knows about trace elements?
Yeah, right. Great. Well, please join me in thanking Carl again. We will have plenty of time during breaks for discussion later if there are any other questions for Carl, but now we will move on to our next speaker,